Daniela, can you stay late tonight? The Henderson account needs some adjustments before tomorrow's presentation, Trevor said, standing by my cubicle with that expectant look he always wore when asking for overtime. I glanced at the clock showing 4:30 p.m. and sighed internally. This was the third time this week, but I nodded anyway. Sure, Trevor. I'll get it sorted. My name is Daniela Cortez, and at 38 years old, I had become the backbone of Nexus One Logistics here in Denver, Colorado. For nearly 9 years, I had been their regional operations analyst, handling everything from client accounts to system integrations that kept our supply chain running smoothly. My colleagues often joked that I was the human equivalent of our main server, always running, never complaining, and somehow essential to everything working properly. The office buzzed around me as I pulled up the Henderson files. Nexus One specialized in freight coordination across the Rocky Mountain region, and our clients trusted us with millions of dollars in cargo every month. I had built most of our current systems from scratch, created the filing protocols that everyone used, and maintained relationships with vendors that Trevor took credit for in meetings. Not that I minded much. I found satisfaction in the work itself, in solving problems that others found impossible. Daniela's on it had become Trevor's standard response whenever CEO Helen Brackmore asked about complicated projects. He had been my supervisor for 3 years now, ever since his transfer from the Portland office. At 41, he possessed an MBA and an inflated sense of his own importance, but he relied on me more than he would ever admit. I knew where every file was stored, had the passwords to accounts he had forgotten about, and understood the intricate relationships between our various client contracts. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Grandpa Elias is asking for you again. The doctors say it might be soon. I stared at the message, feeling a familiar knot form in my stomach. My grandfather, Elias Cortez, was 87 years old and had been battling lung disease for months. He was a decorated World War II veteran who had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Everything I knew about resilience, about quiet strength, and doing what needed to be done, I had learned from him. "Everything okay?" asked Jenna from the neighboring cubicle, noticing my distraction. "Just family stuff," I replied, forcing a smile. "Nothing urgent." But as I worked late into the evening, updating spreadsheets and cross-referencing delivery schedules, I could not shake the feeling that time was running out. Grandpa Elias had always been my anchor, the one person who understood my dedication to work, because he had lived his entire life with the same quiet commitment to duty. I wondered if he knew how much I still needed his guidance. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I fumbled for my phone, instantly awake with the kind of clarity that comes when you have been expecting bad news. "Daniela, honey, it's time." My mother's voice was steady but strained. "Grandpa wants to see you." I drove through empty Denver streets to the hospital, my mind racing between logistics and grief. Grandpa Elias looked smaller than I remembered, but his eyes were still sharp when I entered his room. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "There's my successful granddaughter," he whispered, his voice carrying that familiar pride that had sustained me through every challenge. "Tell me about work. Are they treating you right?" I updated him on the Henderson account, the new efficiency protocols I had implemented, and the cost savings I had identified for our biggest clients. He listened intently, asking questions that showed he understood the business better than most people half his age. Even facing his final hours, he wanted to hear about my achievements. "I taught you to work hard, but I also taught you to stand up for yourself," he said, his grip tightening on my hand. "Don't let anyone make you small, Daniela. You're worth more than they know." He passed away peacefully that Thursday morning, with me holding his hand and my mother stroking his forehead. The funeral arrangements fell naturally to me. I was the organized one, the problem solver who could coordinate flowers and cemetery plots with the same efficiency I brought to shipping manifests. Friday morning, I sat in Trevor's office explaining the situation. "I need to request bereavement leave," I said, sliding the formal paperwork across his desk. 4 days should cover the funeral and immediate family obligations. Trevor barely looked up from his computer. 4 days seems excessive, Daniela. Can't you handle this over a weekend? He was my grandfather and my guardian, I explained patiently. There are veterans' burial arrangements, family members traveling from out of state, and legal matters to settle. He sighed dramatically, as if my grandfather's death was a personal inconvenience to him. Fine, but make sure all your current projects are handed off properly. I don't want any client issues while you're gone. Of course, I replied, already mentally organizing the handoff procedures. I'll prepare detailed notes for everything pending. That afternoon, I sent comprehensive emails to the team, updated all my project files, and even recorded tutorial videos for the more complex procedures. I stayed until 8 p.m., ensuring that my absence would cause minimal disruption. Trevor approved the leave request via email at 9:15 p.m., writing simply, "Approved. Return Monday." As I packed my desk for the temporary absence, I felt an odd mixture of grief and professional satisfaction. Grandpa Elias would have been proud of how thoroughly I had prepared for my time away. I had always been the employee who anticipated problems before they occurred, who built systems robust enough to function without constant oversight. I had no idea that my dedication would soon become my greatest vulnerability. The funeral was everything Grandpa Elias would have wanted: dignified, military honors, and surrounded by people whose lives he had touched. I stood beside his casket at Fort Logan National Cemetery, listening to the 3-volley salute echo across the Colorado plains, feeling proud and heartbroken in equal measure. My cousin Miguel flew in from Phoenix, and my Aunt Teresa came from Albuquerque. We spent hours sharing stories about Grandpa's stubbornness, his terrible jokes, and his unwavering belief that hard work and integrity were the only things that truly mattered. On Saturday evening, we found ourselves going through his papers, discovering medals he had never mentioned, and letters from people whose lives he had quietly helped over the years. "He would have been so proud of your career," Teresa said, holding up a newspaper clipping he had saved about Nexus One winning a regional logistics award. He showed this to everyone at the senior center. I smiled through fresh tears, remembering how he always asked about my work with genuine interest. He understood that my job was not just employment, it was a way of serving others, of keeping the complicated machinery of commerce running smoothly. Just like his military service, my work at Nexus One contributed to something larger than myself. Sunday afternoon, I helped my mother organize his personal effects and made final arrangements with the Veterans Administration. The paperwork was extensive, but I tackled it with the same methodical approach I used for complex client accounts. Every form completed, every detail confirmed, every loose end tied up properly. Monday morning felt strange as I prepared to return to the office. I had taken exactly the 4 days Trevor had approved, and I had left everything in perfect order before my departure. My phone had remained silent over the weekend. No urgent emails, no crisis calls, no indication that Nexus One had struggled without me. I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., 30 minutes earlier than usual, ready to dive back into the Henderson project and catch up on anything that had accumulated during my absence. I badged into the building and walked toward my cubicle, noticing that the office seemed unusually quiet for a Monday morning. My computer monitor was dark. When I tried to log in, the system displayed an error message. "Access denied. Contact IT administrator." "Daniela?" Jenna appeared beside me, her face pale and uncomfortable. "Trevor wants to see you in his office. Right away." I grabbed my coffee mug and headed toward Trevor's office, assuming there was some technical glitch that needed resolving. Maybe the system had automatically deactivated my credentials during my absence, or perhaps there was an urgent client issue that required my immediate attention. I knocked on his door frame and stepped inside. "Good morning, Trevor. I'm back and ready to jump into whatever needs attention." He did not look up from his computer screen. "Actually, Daniela, there's been a change." The way he said it made my stomach drop, but I maintained my professional composure. "What kind of change?" Trevor finally looked at me, his expression cold and bureaucratic. I've decided to go in a different direction with your position. Your employment with Nexus One is terminated, effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, processing what he had just said, certain I had misunderstood. I'm sorry. What did you just say? Your position has been eliminated, he repeated, his tone suggesting this was a routine administrative matter. We need team members who demonstrate unwavering commitment to their responsibilities. Taking 4 days off, even for personal reasons, shows where your priorities lie. I felt my face flush with disbelief. Trevor, you approved my bereavement leave. I submitted the proper paperwork, received written approval, and ensured all my projects were covered before I left. He shrugged dismissively. Approval doesn't mean I have to like it. This company needs people who put work first, who understand that our clients depend on us. When you choose family over professional obligations, it sends a message about your dedication. I buried my grandfather, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. He was a World War II veteran who raised me after my parents died. This wasn't a vacation. It was honoring the man who taught me everything about responsibility and commitment. That's very touching, Trevor replied, his sarcasm cutting deep. But personal circumstances don't excuse professional lapses. Your decision to prioritize personal matters over client needs demonstrates that you're not the right fit for our culture. I stared at him, realizing that everything I had believed about meritocracy and fairness was crumbling in real time. 9 years of exemplary service, 9 years of staying late and solving impossible problems, 9 years of building the systems that kept this company running, all erased because I had dared to grieve properly. Where's Helen? I asked, referring to our CEO. I'd like to discuss this with her. Helen is aware of my decision and supports it. Trevor lied smoothly. I knew he was lying because Helen Brackmore had always appreciated my work and had personally commended my dedication during performance reviews. But I also knew that challenging his authority would only make things worse. I see, I said quietly, feeling a strange calm settle over me. What's the process for transitioning my responsibilities? Trevor looked surprised by my composed reaction. He had probably expected tears or arguments, but Grandpa Elias had taught me that dignity was more valuable than emotional satisfaction. Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal items. Your access has already been revoked. And my current projects? The Henderson account launches next week, and I'm the only one who knows the complete integration requirements. We'll figure it out, he said with false confidence. No one is irreplaceable. I nodded slowly, understanding that he had no idea what he had just destroyed. Trevor lived in a world where management decisions looked clean on paper, where personnel changes seemed simple, and consequences remained invisible until they exploded in your face. He did not understand that I had spent 9 years becoming indispensable, not through politics or networking, but through sheer competence and institutional knowledge. Is there anything else? I asked. Just remember your confidentiality agreement, he said, already turning back to his computer. And please don't make this more difficult than necessary. I walked back to my cubicle where a security guard was already waiting. Jenna and several other colleagues watched with obvious distress as I cleaned out my desk drawers, packing family photos and personal coffee mug into a cardboard box. No one spoke. They understood that their jobs might be at risk if they showed too much sympathy. The security guard, an older man named Pete, who had always been friendly during late-night shifts, looked genuinely sorry as he escorted me to the parking garage. This doesn't seem right, Miss Cortez, he said quietly as we reached my car. You were always decent to everyone. Thank you, Pete, I replied, meaning it. Take care of yourself. As I drove away from Nexus One for the last time, I felt surprisingly peaceful. Grandpa Elias had taught me that dignity meant accepting what you could not change, while quietly preparing to change what you could not accept. I drove home through downtown Denver, past the office buildings where I had spent nearly a decade of my life, feeling oddly liberated despite the shock of unemployment. The mountain peaks visible in the distance reminded me of something Grandpa Elias used to say. Sometimes you have to climb the mountain to see how small the valley really was. At home, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, opening my laptop to assess my situation. I had always been financially responsible, a habit learned from my grandfather, so I had substantial savings and no debt except my mortgage. More importantly, I possessed 9 years of specialized knowledge about logistics systems, client relationships, and operational efficiency that had value far beyond Nexus One's narrow perspective. My phone buzzed with text messages from colleagues who had heard about my termination. Jenna wrote, "This is insane. Everyone knows you're the best analyst we have." Carlos from accounting added, "Trevor's making a huge mistake. Is there anything I can do?" I appreciated their support, but I also understood they were scared. Trevor had just demonstrated that job security meant nothing if you crossed invisible lines he drew without warning. My colleagues needed to protect themselves, and I did not blame them for keeping their distance. Instead of dwelling on anger or self-pity, I began researching the logistics consulting market in Colorado. Within 2 hours, I had identified 6 companies that specialized in supply chain optimization, and 3 independent consultants who were earning significant fees for exactly the kind of work I had been doing at Nexus One. The difference was that consultants charged premium rates for project-based work, while employees accepted steady salaries for unlimited availability. By Tuesday afternoon, I had created a professional website, updated my LinkedIn profile, and reached out to former vendors who had always praised my efficiency and problem-solving abilities. The response was immediate and encouraging. Sandra Rodriguez from Front Range Shipping called within hours. "Daniela, I heard what happened at Nexus One. That's their loss and our gain. I have 3 clients who need exactly your expertise." Wednesday morning brought my first consulting contract, a 2-week project analyzing distribution bottlenecks for a growing e-commerce company. The daily rate was more than I had earned weekly as a Nexus One employee, and the scope was limited to specific deliverables rather than endless availability for Trevor's last-minute demands. I worked from my home office, feeling productive and valued in ways I had forgotten were possible. My new client appreciated my insights, implemented my recommendations immediately, and referred me to 2 additional companies before the project was even completed. For the first time in years, I was being compensated fairly for my expertise, rather than taken for granted. Thursday afternoon, while reviewing supply chain data for my second client, I received an unexpected phone call from Maya Chen, a former Nexus One colleague, who had left the company 6 months earlier to join a competitor. "Daniela, I just heard what Trevor did to you," she said, her voice tight with anger. "I need to tell you something, but you have to promise to keep this confidential until I figure out how to handle it." "Of course," I replied, curious about her urgency. "Trevor's been taking credit for your work in executive meetings. Last month, he presented your Henderson account optimization as his own strategic initiative to the board of directors. Helen was so impressed that she's considering promoting him to regional manager." I felt a cold clarity settle over me as Maya continued describing Trevor's systematic appropriation of my accomplishments. He had not just fired me for grieving my grandfather. He had stolen my professional identity to advance his own career. The man who called me irreplaceable had been building his reputation on my innovations while positioning himself to eliminate the person who could expose his incompetence. "Maya," I said slowly, "I think Trevor just made the biggest mistake of his career." Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made Denver beautiful, and I woke up with a sense of purpose I had not felt in years. As an independent consultant, I was already earning more than my Nexus One salary while working fewer hours and dealing with clients who actually appreciated my expertise. But Maya's revelation about Trevor's theft of my work had ignited something deeper than professional ambition. It had awakened my grandfather's sense of justice. I spent the morning researching Trevor's background, discovering a pattern that explained everything. At his previous position in Portland, he had been transferred laterally after a project failure. And before that, His tenure in Seattle had ended with what HR euphemistically called performance concerns. Trevor was not a rising star. He was a corporate survivor who advanced by claiming credit for other people's successes while avoiding responsibility for his own failures. The irony was perfect. By firing me, Trevor had eliminated the only person who could cover for his incompetence when real challenges arose. He had stolen my innovations to impress Helen Brackmore, but he lacked the deep knowledge to implement or maintain the systems he claimed to have created. It was like a chef taking credit for a recipe without knowing the ingredients. My phone rang at 11 a.m. Helen Brackmore's name appeared on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief, but revealing. Daniela, this is Helen. I need to discuss an urgent matter with you. Please call me back as soon as possible. I did not call back. Instead, I researched Helen's background and discovered that she was actually quite competent. The kind of CEO who had built Nexus One through smart decisions and genuine leadership. Trevor's deception had not just harmed me, it had compromised her ability to make informed decisions about her own company. An hour later, Helen called again. This time, her voicemail sounded more desperate. Daniela, we have a serious situation with the Henderson account. I know Trevor let you go, but I need your help. The integration is failing and no one understands the system requirements. Please call me. I smiled, remembering Grandpa Elias's advice about patience being a tactical advantage. Trevor had convinced Helen that he understood my work well enough to manage without me, and now reality was proving him wrong. The Henderson account represented Nexus One's largest new client, worth nearly $2 million annually. If that integration failed, it would damage the company's reputation and cost Trevor his credibility. My consulting phone rang with a new opportunity, a 6-month contract with a transportation company that would pay more than my entire annual Nexus One salary. As I discussed project scope with my new client, Helen called a third time. I let it go to voicemail and continued my consultation. That evening, I received a text from Jenna. The Henderson integration crashed completely. Trevor's been in emergency meetings all day. Helen looks furious. Everyone's asking where you are. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Grandpa Elias had taught me that the best revenge was not emotional satisfaction, but professional excellence. By firing me for honoring his memory, Trevor had handed me the keys to my own liberation, while ensuring his own professional destruction. My phone buzzed with another call from Helen. I set it aside and opened my laptop to work on my expanding consulting business. Some lessons, I reflected, could only be learned through consequences. Trevor was about to discover that competence could not be faked, that institutional knowledge could not be stolen, and that firing your most valuable employee during a crisis was a mistake that no MBA could fix. Monday morning brought the call I had been expecting. Helen Brackmore's voice was strained but professional when I finally answered at 10 a.m., after letting her wait through 3 previous attempts. Daniela, thank you for taking my call, she began, her usual executive confidence replaced by barely controlled desperation. I need to discuss a critical situation with you. Of course, Helen, I replied calmly, sitting in my home office with contracts from 3 new consulting clients spread across my desk. What can I help you with? The Henderson account integration has completely failed, she said, her words tumbling out rapidly. The system crashed over the weekend, and we've lost access to all their shipping data. Their freight is backed up at 4 distribution centers, and they're threatening to terminate our contract unless we resolve this immediately. I sipped my coffee and waited for her to continue. Through my window, I could see the snow-capped peaks of the Front Range, reminding me of how much larger the world was than Nexus One's small crisis. Trevor assured me that he understood your systems completely, Helen continued, but it's become clear that no one else has the access codes or technical knowledge to restore the integration. We need your expertise. I see, I said neutrally. And what exactly are you proposing? I'd like to offer you a consulting contract to fix this problem, she said quickly. We'll pay your standard consulting rate, plus a completion bonus. This could be resolved in a few days if you're available. I paused, pretending to consider her offer while actually reviewing the email I had received that morning from a logistics firm in Seattle. They wanted me to design their entire supply chain system, a 6-month project worth more than I had earned in 2 years at Nexus One. Helen, I appreciate the offer, I said finally, but I'm afraid I'm not available for that type of work. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Helen spoke again, her voice smaller. What do you mean you're not available? My priorities have changed, I explained, echoing Trevor's own words back to her. I'm focusing on clients who value long-term partnerships rather than short-term problem-solving. I'm sure Trevor will figure something out. Helen's breathing was audible through the phone as she processed my polite refusal. Daniela, I think there's been a misunderstanding about your termination. I wasn't involved in Trevor's decision, and I don't think he properly considered the implications. There's no misunderstanding, I replied gently. Trevor made it very clear that Nexus One needs employees who put work before personal obligations. I respected his decision and moved on accordingly. But this is different, Helen protested. We're talking about a consulting arrangement, not employment. You'd be working as an independent contractor. I understand the distinction, I said. But I've already committed to other clients who appreciate my expertise from the beginning of our relationship, rather than only when they're facing a crisis. I could hear Helen conferring with someone in the background, probably Trevor, frantically trying to salvage his reputation. When she returned to the call, her tone had shifted from desperation to something approaching panic. The Henderson account is worth $2 million annually, she said. If we lose them, it will impact our entire operation. Surely we can work something out. I'm certain you'll find a solution, I assured her. Trevor mentioned that no one is irreplaceable, so I'm confident he'll demonstrate that principle. Daniela, please. Helen's professional facade finally cracked. I'm asking for your help not just as CEO of Nexus One, but as someone who genuinely regrets what happened to you. Trevor made a terrible mistake. I appreciate your honesty, Helen, I said, meaning it. But I learned from my grandfather that respect is earned through consistency, not crisis management. When someone shows you who they really are, it's wise to believe them. I could hear papers shuffling and muffled voices as Helen struggled to find some argument that might change my mind. There was nothing she could say that would repair the damage Trevor had caused, and we both knew it. I have to respect your decision, she said finally, defeat evident in her voice. But if you change your mind... I won't, I assured her, but I wish you the best in resolving this situation. After ending the call, I returned to my consulting work, feeling the quiet satisfaction that comes from professional validation. My new clients valued my expertise enough to plan projects around my availability, to seek my input during the planning phase, rather than only when their systems failed. That afternoon, Jenna texted me an update. Henderson account officially terminated their contract. Trevor's been called into emergency meetings with the board. Word is he might be demoted or worse. I did not reply to her message, but I felt a deep sense of completion. Grandpa Elias had taught me that justice was not about punishment, but about natural consequences. Trevor had chosen to prioritize his ego over competence, to steal credit rather than earn it, and to fire the person whose knowledge he needed most. The consequences were simply the inevitable result of his choices. By the time November snow began falling on Denver, Trevor had been quietly transferred to a junior position in Nexus One's struggling Phoenix office. Helen had hired an expensive consulting firm to rebuild the systems I had created, but they lacked the institutional knowledge that made those systems effective. 3 more major clients had switched to competitors, and Nexus One's reputation in the Colorado logistics market had suffered permanent damage. Meanwhile, my consulting practice was thriving. I had built a client base that valued expertise over availability, results over presence, and long-term relationships over short-term exploitation. Most importantly, I had honored my grandfather's memory by demonstrating that dignity and competence were more powerful than desperation and deception. Sometimes the best revenge was simply being excellent at what you do, while allowing others to face the consequences of their own poor judgment. As I reflected on my journey from devoted employee to independent consultant, I realized that losing my job at Nexus One had been the greatest professional gift I could have received. It forced me to discover my true worth in a market that rewarded competence rather than loyalty, and showed me that standing up for family was always the right choice, no matter what the cost.